Like the best remakes do, Link's Awakening for the Switch maintains the magic of the original game while adding a new aesthetic direction that enhances the experience, one that would have been totally impossible on the original hardware. This is just as true for the soundtrack as it is for the graphics. Arranger Ryo Nagamatsu shows a reverence for the original game score by leaving the actual note-to-note composition of each piece almost completely untouched, while enhancing each's character by scoring them for small chamber ensembles of live instruments, string quartets, clarinets, oboes, and even recorders. The handful of tunes with extra musical elements added always serve to expand on what the original music was going for, like the sleepy trombone quartet added to the Owls theme. Or the devastating string chords fleshing out the Face Shrine theme's harmony. You can also hear the original Game Boy chip sounds used alongside real instruments in the Face Shrine theme, Marin and Link's beach scene, the end credits, and a handful of other spots throughout the game as an excellent homage to the original soundtrack. For early game consoles with limited memory space for music, like the NES or Game Boy, game composers had to be incredibly deliberate with how they wrote their music, carefully choosing every note to get the most out of the limited channels that they had. The high level of craftsmanship required to write for these early games is part of what makes these pieces of music so special, and leaving that intact while adding a modern level of polish and an adventurous aesthetic choice make the Link's Awakening Remake's soundtrack one of my favorites of all time. The original game's short, looping pieces are stretched out through varying orchestration into lengthy arrangements with new dynamic arcs that weren't there in the original score. For instance, Mabe Village's music consisted of two simple parts that captured the tranquility of this little town. This 9-bar loop is expanded in the remake as new orchestration takes over on each repeat of the music, starting off on a toy piano, adding in 3-part string pads that flesh out the original's implied harmony, then moving to a clarinet melody with the toy piano accompaniment. The strings come back in as recorder takes the melody, passing it off to clarinet and bassoon in octaves. The arrangement comes down to its lowest point as we get just the toy piano accompaniment line for a chorus before finishing off at a climax as French horn and recorder trade off the melody over the toy piano and lush string chords. The original piece's 9-bar loop is now a 54-bar loop with a satisfying intensity arc and tasteful, colorful instrumentation. One ensemble used a few times throughout the game, one that immediately caught my ear from the very first announcement trailer, was the Wind Quintet. I've always been curious about writing for Wind Quintet because it's such a unique ensemble. Each voice has a distinct character from the others, and the different combination of voices can result in a huge number of colors. This makes it completely different from more homogeneous groups like string or brass ensembles, and even more different from the world of guitars, drums, and pianos that I grew up in and am more comfortable with. I love the way Wind Quintet sounds though, and in an attempt to step out of my comfort zone and learn how to write for this kind of ensemble, I decided to look to this soundtrack for inspiration. And that's what I want to talk about today: how I learned to steal an arrangement the right way. My original idea was this: transcribe an arrangement from the game, compare it to the original Game Boy music, and analyze exactly how the original parts were translated into the new arrangement. Then, I would go through bar by bar and write down the equation of how the arrangement was constructed out of the base material. Finally, I would pick a piece from a different game that was relatively similar to the Zelda music I had analyzed, plug it into my arrangement formula, and produce a brand new, totally not plagiarized arrangement. Easy. Things started off well. I picked the game's title theme and transcribed the parts. Instead of your typical wind quintet ensemble of flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, and French horn, I found this piece was scored for a wind sextet of flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, bass clarinet, and recorder, along with a cajon and a dash of suspended cymbal and wind chimes. Like Mabe Village, there was relatively little added to the original composition and even less taken away, but the fluctuating orchestration allowed for a huge variety of color, enhancing the dynamic intensity of the original music and drawing the piece out to twice the original's length. Some instruments had very consistent roles throughout the piece. The bass clarinet had the bass line from top to bottom, and the recorder always had the melody when it was around. Other instruments juggled a variety of roles as the piece went on. Melody, counter-melody, and the offbeat staccato accompaniment from the original bounced between flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon on an almost bar-by-bar basis. After completing my perfect arrangement equation, I decided to plug in a piece from another Game Boy tune with a very similar vibe, the opening theme from the original Pokémon Red, Blue, and Yellow. This is perfect. Both pieces are title themes, they both have the same number of voices, and they both have the same heroic vibe. How could this go wrong? Well, I'll tell you how it could go wrong because the arrangement sounded like trash. I realized quickly why my equation strategy wouldn't work. The orchestration of Zelda's title theme was specifically designed to enhance the composition of that piece, and that piece has a completely different structure to Pokémon's opening music. On one side, a basic motif is established and evolves through 5 melodic phrases over the course of 8 bars, with a 9th bar added to transition back to the top of the form. The harmony descends steadily into darker and darker territory before being thrust back to the major tonic at the top. This is a jam-packed, fast-paced musical structure. On the other side, one sparse melodic phrase is slightly varied upon and repeated 4 times over the course of a 16-bar A section, over top of a repeating 2-chord vamp, which then moves into an additional 8-bar B section with completely new material. This structure is chugging along steadily at a relatively slow pace and couldn't be more different from the Zelda piece I had transcribed. Even if I had just tried to smoosh this orchestration onto the Pokémon tune, the points of climax and release in the orchestration wouldn't line up with the climaxes and releases of the composition. Turns out stealing an arrangement isn't quite as easy as I thought it would be. To solve this problem, I had to make a few key changes in my approach, but I did eventually finish an arrangement that I'm proud of. First, I changed my bar-by-bar analysis to a phrase-by-phrase analysis. For example, Zelda's opening phrase gives the melody to recorder and the counterline to oboe. Then for the second melodic phrase, we see the recorder melody harmonized by the oboe a tenth below, while the counterline moves on to the flute. This all takes place in the first 3 bars of the form. I did the same thing with the Pokémon theme. The first phrase had recorder on the melody and oboe on the counterline, while the second phrase saw oboe harmonize the melody and flute take the counterline. These 2 phrases take 8 bars to play out rather than 3, but this way the orchestration fits the character and the structure of the composition. I also had to pay more attention to the range that each instrument was operating in. If a counterline appeared in the arrangement 1 octave below where it was originally, that didn't necessarily mean I should do the same to the counterline in my arrangement. These register shifts were there to facilitate working in a specific range of the instrument playing the line, as each instrument can vary wildly in character based on what part of its range it's playing in. For my arrangement, I learned to steal the ideas of using each instrument's specific registers in specific places rather than focus on how each line was transformed from the original Game Boy tune. Instead of making sure I followed the roadmap laid out by the original arrangement as closely as possible, I looked for parts of the arrangement that closely matched what was happening in the Pokémon tune as I moved through it. For instance, the third melodic phrase in Pokémon starts with an exact repetition of the first phrase, while the third melodic phrase in Zelda is a completely new iteration that has evolved from the initial melodic idea. Instead of taking the orchestration from this part of Zelda's arrangement and sticking it onto this part of my Pokemon arrangement, I looked around Zelda's arrangement for a place where an old melodic idea is being repeated. After the point where the original piece looped back to the beginning, Nagamatsu's arrangement extends out another chorus of music with new orchestration, and the opening melodic phrase is stripped down from a full ensemble with recorder melody to a quartet with clarinet taking the melody an octave lower, bringing the intensity of the arrangement down for a moment. This arranging idea fit the equivalent point in my Pokemon arrangement much better. Experimenting with different ways of piecing these orchestration ideas together taught me more little lessons like this than I could fit into a video of any reasonable length. After lots of trial and error and lots of scrapped arrangements, I ended up with a final product that I'm pretty satisfied with. More importantly though, I have a much better idea now of how and why arrangers for this kind of ensemble make the decisions that they make, and hopefully I can explore this further in the future. Here's the final arrangement, performed by 3 great VGM cover musicians whose channels you should definitely check out: Basoonify, Medlix, and Soundle. I can't recommend this process of arrangement stealing enough for those of you who find it daunting to just jump into arranging for an ensemble like this. Again, go check out these 3 channels if you enjoyed this kind of thing at all. They're all much better at arranging than I am, as they actually have a clue what they're doing. If you're interested in this kind of thing but find it too daunting to try and transcribe a whole arrangement from scratch, check out my Patreon page where $5 and up patrons get access to these and other arrangements I've transcribed from the game, as well as all of the transcriptions I make for this channel. Incidentally, big thank you to patron Jonathan Garcia for requesting this topic. You can follow me on Twitter at 8-Bit Music Theory, and if you'd like to hang out in an online community full of video game music nerds, consider checking out the 8-Bit Music Theory Discord server. Links to everything are in the description below, of course. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.